The map in the ashes. The rain arrived like a verdict. It didn't fall so much as press itself against the windows of the old house, turning the streetlights into smeared halos and the familiar neighborhood into something half-remembered. I stood in the hallway beneath the chandelier that had never been properly cleaned, listening to the house breathe. Wood settling, pipes murmuring, the distant tick of a clock that seemed to be keeping its own time. My name is Elena Ward ***, and I had returned to Hollowgate ** after 10 years of absence for reasons I could barely explain to myself. The letter had come on plain stationery, no return address, only my name written in a hand I recognized with a jolt, small, careful, almost childlike. The single line inside read, "You were wrong about what happened. Come before it happens again." Hollowgate had never been kind to me, but it had never let me go either. The town sat in a shallow valley where fog gathered in the evenings, and where old buildings leaned toward one another as if sharing secrets. My family's house, Greyhaven, was the largest on the hill, a grand, decaying relic that had belonged to my grandparents, and then briefly to my parents before they vanished in circumstances the town preferred not to discuss. I had been 17 when my parents left. The police called it a disappearance. The town called it a scandal. I called it a wound that never healed. When I left Hollowgate, I promised myself I would never return, but the letter had undone that promise with the precision of a lock-picking. That evening I walked through the house with a flashlight, not because the power was out, but because I wanted to feel the darkness as something deliberate. The air smelled faintly of dust and old paper and the sharp, metallic tang of rain. In the library, my grandfather's sanctuary, books lined the walls in uneven rows, their spines cracked and faded. The desk sat beneath a stained skylight, the glass clouded with age. On the desk, something was waiting. A shallow tray of ashes, cold, gray, carefully arranged, rested as if it had been placed there moments ago. In the center of the ashes was a shape, a thin line, a curve, a series of small marks that suggested a route, a map, or the ghost of one. I didn't touch it, not yet. Instead, I stepped back and let my eyes adjust, searching for anything else. That's when I noticed the paper beneath the tray, a single sheet folded once, the edges singed. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. It was a page torn from a ledger, numbers, dates, names. And at the bottom, written in the same careful hand as the letter, were the words, "The key is in the place you never looked." The sound of the rain intensified, as if the house had been holding its breath and now released it. I turned toward the door and saw a shadow cross the hallway beyond, tall, moving with purpose, then gone. My heart hammered, but the house offered no explanation. Only silence, heavy and expectant. I spent the next hour searching not for the key, but for anything that would make sense of what I had found. In the cellar, I discovered a locked door I didn't remember from my childhood. The lock was old, rusted, but the wood around it had been freshly disturbed. Scratches, splinters, the faint scent of oil. Someone had been here recently. Someone had been trying to get in. Back upstairs, I found my grandfather's old study. A framed photograph hung above the desk, a group of townspeople standing in front of the church, smiling stiffly for the camera. In the back row, I recognized faces I had avoided for years, faces that had watched my parents leave and then watched me leave. But there was one face I didn't recognize. A man in a dark coat, his expression unreadable, his hat casting a shadow across his eyes. I took the photograph down and examined it closely. On the back, someone had written a date and a single word, midnight. The clock in the hallway struck 9. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked. I felt it then, an awareness as if I were being observed. Not by a person, but by the house itself, as if Greyhaven had been waiting for me to return and had begun to speak in its own language. I returned to the library, and this time I touched the ashes. They were cool, dry, and fine like powdered charcoal. When my fingertip grazed the line of the map, it left a faint trail as though the ash was sensitive to heat or breath. I drew back, startled, and the trail faded. A trick of the light, or something else? I decided I needed help, but who could I trust in Hollowgate? The townspeople had their own stories, their own loyalties, their own reasons to keep the past buried. My only real connection was Mara Keen ***, my childhood friend, now the town librarian and someone I hadn't spoken to in years. If anyone knew the town's hidden history, it would be Mara. I called her. The phone rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. Her voice was calm, professional. Mara Keen, Hollowgate Public Library. I left a message anyway, my words careful, controlled. Mara, it's Elena. I'm at Greyhaven. Something's happening. Please call me back. As I hung up, the lights flickered. Not a blackout, just a hesitation, like the house pausing. Then the chandelier above the hallway swung, gently at first, as if stirred by an unseen hand. I stepped into the hallway and saw it. A thin ribbon of ash drifting from the library doorway, carried on an impossible current of air. It curled and twisted, forming letters against the dark wood of the floor. Don't trust the clock. The clock struck 10. The Library of Lost Names. The warning on the floor did not vanish. The ash remained, stubborn and deliberate, as if the house had written it and refused to erase its work. I stood frozen, listening to the rain and the ticking clock, trying to decide whether I was losing my mind or whether Hollowgate had finally decided to show its true face. I called Mara again, still voicemail. This time I left a more urgent message. Mara, please, if you get this, don't come to Greyhaven alone, and don't go near the church at midnight. I hesitated, then added, I think someone is using the town's history against us. The church, midnight, the photograph, the ledger page. The pieces were beginning to connect, but the pattern was incomplete, like a puzzle missing half its edges. I needed to see Mara in person. If she wouldn't answer the phone, I would go to her. The library was a short walk from Greyhaven, but in Hollowgate the streets felt longer at night, as though the town itself was stretching time. Fog clung to the pavement, turning familiar landmarks into silhouettes. The church rose at the end of the main road, its spire sharp against the clouds, its windows dark. As I approached the library, I noticed something unusual. The front door was slightly ajar. Not open enough to invite, but enough to suggest that someone had passed through recently. My pulse quickened. I stepped inside. The library smelled of paper, glue, and damp wood, comforting scents, but tonight they felt wrong, like a mask over something hidden. The lights were off, and the air was colder than it should have been. I reached for my flashlight and switched it on. The beam cut across the main room, revealing rows of shelves, reading tables, and the familiar counter where Mara usually sat. But the counter was empty. The usual orderly stacks were disturbed, books pulled out, some lying on the floor, their pages bent as if handled roughly. Mara, I called, my voice low. No answer. I moved toward the back office, where Mara kept her records in the town's archives. The door was closed, but I could see a thin line of light beneath it, faint, shifting, as if someone was moving a lantern inside. I paused, listening. There was a soft scraping sound, like a chair being dragged across wood. I knocked. Mara, it's Elena. The scraping stopped. For a moment there was only silence. Then the door opened a crack. Mara's face appeared, pale and drawn, her eyes wide with fear. Elena, she whispered, as if my name was dangerous. You shouldn't be here. Why? I asked, stepping closer. What's going on? Mara glanced over her shoulder into the office, then back at me. They're looking for the ledger, the old ledger, the one your grandfather kept. My stomach tightened. My grandfather's ledger, the one with names and dates. She nodded. It's not just records, it's a key to the town's agreement, and someone has been trying to rewrite it. I pushed the door open wider. The office was cluttered, stacks of books, boxes, files, a small safe in the corner. On the desk lay a ledger, its leather cover cracked, its pages yellowed with age. Beside it was a second book, newer, its spine clean and unmarked, an imposter placed there deliberately. Mara stepped back, her hands trembling. I found it hidden in the basement archives earlier today. I was going to call you. Then someone came. I heard footsteps. I turned off the lights and hid. Who? I asked. Mara swallowed. I didn't see a face, but I heard a voice, low, calm. It said, "You don't understand what you're protecting." A chill ran through me. Did they take anything? Mara shook her head. Not yet. I think they were interrupted, but they'll be back. I crossed the room and examined the old ledger. Its pages were filled with meticulous handwriting, dates, names, transactions, and notes in the margins. One entry caught my eye, a list of names under the heading ***, Midnight Accord ***. My parents' names were there. My grandfather, S. And further down, the name of the man from the photograph, Silas Ven ***. Mara leaned in, her voice barely audible. Silas Ven was the town's solicitor. He disappeared the same night your parents did. The connection landed like a stone. So this isn't just a family story, I said. It's a town story. Mara nodded. And the town has been keeping it quiet for years. People were paid. People were threatened. People were made to forget. A sound echoed from the front of the library, soft, deliberate footsteps. Someone was moving through the stacks, taking their time. Mara and I exchanged a look. We had minutes, maybe less. "We need to get the ledger out of here," I whispered. Mara hesitated. "If we take it, they'll know they'll take it," I said, "and we'll lose whatever chance we have to understand what happened." We moved quickly. I gathered the old ledger and Mara grabbed the photograph I had brought from Greyhaven, along with the singed ledger page. We slipped out the back door, into the narrow alley behind the library. The rain had softened, but the fog was thicker now, wrapping around us like a curtain. As we hurried toward Greyhaven, the church bell began to toll, slow, heavy chimes that felt like a countdown. Each note pressed against the night, and in the distance I saw movement near the churchyard. Shadows moving between the graves, indistinct but purposeful. Mara shivered. "They're gathering." "For what?" I asked. "For midnight," she said, and her voice was tight with fear. We reached Greyhaven just as the clock in the hallway struck 11. The house seemed to watch us enter, its windows dark, its silence expectant. I carried the ledger to the library and laid it on the desk. The ashes of the map were still there, faint but present, as if waiting to be completed. I opened the ledger to the page marked ***, Midnight Accord. Beneath the list of names was a set of instructions, coordinates, landmarks, and a final line that made my blood run cold. "When the bell strikes 12, the gate between what is and what was will open. Only the one who carries the true key may close it." The church bell began to toll again, 11 chimes, then 12. The air in the library changed. The ash on the desk stirred, lifting into the air as if drawn by an unseen force. It formed a shape, an arch, a doorway hovering inches above the surface. Through it I glimpsed something impossible, a corridor of fog and stone, a place that felt both ancient and disturbingly familiar. Mara gasped, "Elena, what is that?" I stepped closer, my hand hovering near the arch. "I don't know," I whispered, "but I think it's the reason my parents disappeared." The corridor between times. The arch of ash hung above the library desk like a wound in the air, thin, trembling, impossibly precise. Through it fog rolled in slow sheets, revealing a corridor of damp stone and old mortar, lit by a pale, sourceless glow. The air that seeped through smelled of wet earth and something older, iron, cold water, and the faint, metallic tang of memory. Mara Keene stood frozen behind me, her hands gripping the ledger as if it were a shield. "Elena," she whispered, this can't be real." I didn't answer immediately. I couldn't. My mind kept returning to the ledger entry. "When the bell strikes 12, the gate between what is and what was will open. Only the one who carries the true key may close it." The words had the weight of a law, ancient, binding, indifferent to fear. The corridor beyond the arch shifted as though it were aware of us. A shape moved in the distance, tall, indistinct, accompanied by the soft scrape of boots on stone. My pulse thudded in my ears. Whoever or whatever was out there, they were close enough that I felt watched. "We can't just stand here," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "If the gate opened because of the bell, it might close when the bell stops, or when something else happens. We need to understand where it leads." Mara swallowed. "And if it leads to the place my parents disappeared?" "I think it does," I said. "Or at least to the place where the town decided to hide what happened." I stepped forward, my fingertips hovering near the ash arch. The moment I neared it, the air turned colder, and a faint vibration ran through the desk and into my bones like a distant drum. The ash responded to my proximity, brightening at the edges as if eager. I hesitated, then crossed the threshold. The sensation was immediate and disorienting. It was like stepping into deep water, pressure on my chest, a moment of weightlessness, then solid ground beneath my feet. The library vanished behind me, replaced by the corridor of stone. The arch behind me shimmered, still present but translucent, an exit line drawn in ash. Mara followed, her breath catching as she crossed. "I feel strange," she murmured, "like I'm remembering something I never lived." I understood that feeling. The corridor seemed to press against my thoughts, coaxing them toward half-formed images, my parents' voices, laughter in a kitchen that wasn't mine, a man in a dark coat standing in the rain, his face shadowed by a hat. Silas Venn. The name surfaced without warning, sharp and undeniable. "Stay close," I told Mara, "and don't touch the walls. They look like stone, but they might be something else." We moved forward. The corridor bent gently, as if designed for walking, not wandering. Along one side were recessed alcoves, each containing objects: a rusted lantern, a bundle of cloth, a small wooden box, a metal key on a chain. None of them belonged to Greyhaven. They felt older, carried from a different era. In one alcove, I found a sheet of parchment sealed with wax. The wax bore an imprint I recognized from the town's old records, a crest that belonged to the Hollowgate Council, an emblem of a bell, a gate, and a single eye. I broke the seal carefully and unfolded the parchment. It was a ledger page, but not from my grandfather's book. The handwriting was different, more formal, almost clerical. It listed names, dates, and payments, compensation for silence, for forgetting, for compliance. At the bottom was a signature, Silas Venn ***, and beneath it a line that sent a shock through me. The gate must be maintained at all costs. The truth would collapse the town. Mara leaned in, reading over my shoulder. "So it was planned," she whispered. "The disappearances, the cover-up, all of it." "Planned," I agreed, "and ongoing." A sound echoed down the corridor, footsteps, heavier now, deliberate. The figure I had glimpsed earlier resolved into a silhouette as it approached, a man in a long coat, his face obscured by shadow. He carried a lantern that cast a warm, deceptive light, and when he spoke, his voice was calm, almost gentle. "Elena Ward," he said, "you've come sooner than expected." Myra tightened her grip on my arm. "Who are you?" I demanded. The man paused, as if considering how much truth he could afford. "A caretaker," he finally said, "of what Hollowgate refuses to acknowledge." "And Silas Venn?" I asked. The shadow shifted. Silas was a facilitator. He made the arrangements. He wrote the contracts. He ensured the gate stayed hidden. I held up the parchment. "Then you know what this is." "I know enough," he replied, "more than the town deserves." The lantern light flickered, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of his face, older than I expected, lined with exhaustion, his eyes sharp with intelligence. He wasn't threatening us. He was wary, as if we were the danger. "Why did you send the letter?" I asked. "To wake you," he said, "to bring you back before the next cycle begins." "The next cycle," Mara echoed. The man nodded toward the corridor ahead. "The gate opens on schedule, always has. Midnight is not a time, it's a threshold. When it opens, something is released, something that feeds on what the town has buried. A chill settled over me. My parents were taken, he said, and there was no comfort in his tone. Not by accident, by necessity as the town saw it, to keep the gate stable. Mara's voice broke. That's monstrous. It is, the man admitted, and it has been justified for generations. People convinced themselves it was protection, that it was for the greater good, but the cost has grown. I steadied myself. Then why bring me back now? What do you want from me? The man lifted his lantern, illuminating a side passage I hadn't noticed before. Carved into the stone wall was a map, an intricate diagram of Hollowgate, the church, the river, the old mine, and Greyhaven. Marked points glowed faintly like embers. At the center was a symbol I had seen before, the bell, the gate, the eye. The key, he said, is not a thing, it's a role, a responsibility. It passes through bloodlines, through memory, through choices. Your grandfather understood that. Your parents resisted it. And me, I asked. You are the only one who can choose, he said. The town will try to force you into the old pattern. They will offer you safety. They will threaten you with consequences. They will tell you the truth is too dangerous. Mara's grip tightened. Then what do we do? The man turned back toward the main corridor. We find the anchor, he said, the place where the gate is held in place. If it fails, Hollowgate will not survive what comes through. As we followed him, the corridor widened into a chamber. Its ceiling was vaulted, carved with symbols that looked both religious and mechanical, bells, gears, interlocking circles, and a central stone slab engraved with names. My parents' names were there. My grandfather S. Silas Venz, and at the very top a blank space waiting. The man placed his lantern on the slab. This is where the accord was sealed, he said. Every generation adds a name. Every generation pays in silence. I stared at the blank space. You want me to put my name there? I want you to understand what it means, he said, and to decide whether you will carry it or break it. A sound echoed from behind us, footsteps, many of them moving with purpose. The caretaker's expression hardened. They've followed you, he said. The town's enforcers, people who believe the gate must be protected at any cost. Mara's voice shook. How many? Enough to stop us, he said, unless we move quickly. He gestured toward a narrow passage on the far side of the chamber, dark, steep, leading downward. That way, he said, to the anchor, to the thing that holds the gate in place. I hesitated, the ledger in my arms suddenly heavy. The parchment, the ash arch, the names on the slab, everything pointed to one terrifying truth. Hollowgate was built on a bargain that demanded sacrifice, and now the town was coming to collect. Run, the caretaker said, and if you hear the bell again, don't answer it. We sprinted toward the passage as the chamber filled with the sound of approaching voices. Somewhere in the dark beyond, a bell began to toll, soft at first, then louder, as if it had been waiting for us to make our choice. Below is *** chapter 4, tilde 2,000 words, continuing directly from chapter 3's frantic escape into the downward passage as the bell tolls and the town's enforcers close in. This chapter deepens the mystery, clarifies the central conflict, introduces key characters with plausible motives, and sets up a major turning point, while keeping the same atmospheric, suspense-driven voice and strong narrative momentum toward the full ~40,000-word story. The anchor beneath the bell. The passage swallowed us the way old places always do, quickly, completely, as if it had been waiting to reclaim us. Stone walls narrowed, the air cooled, and the sound of pursuit, boots, urgent voices, the occasional scrape of metal, faded behind us until it became a distant, ominous murmur. Above, the bell continued to toll, each note pressing through the earth like a hand on my chest. Mara kept close at my side, her breathing shallow, the ledger clutched to her body as though it were part of her. The caretaker led the way with his lantern, its light painting trembling gold across the damp rock. His pace was controlled, almost practiced, as if he had walked this route many times and knew where the ground would give way, where the air would turn stale, where the silence would deepen. "Talk to me," I said, my voice low. "Who are they back there?" The caretaker didn't look back. "They call themselves the keepers **," he said. "A committee formed generations ago when the town first learned what Hollowgate sits on. They believe the gate is a necessary evil. They believe the truth would fracture the valley, flood the mines, collapse the church, unmake the streets." Mara shivered. "And what do you believe?" The caretaker's lantern light caught the edge of a carved symbol in the wall, the bell, the gate, the eye. He paused, tracing it with one finger. "I believe the gate is real," he said, "and I believe it's being misused. The accord wasn't meant to be a cage. It was meant to be a lock, one that could be opened safely when needed. Over time, fear replaced wisdom. Now they protect the gate by sacrificing people." The word **sacrificing** landed like a stone. "My parents," I said. He nodded once, grim. "Your parents were inconvenient. They asked questions. They gathered proof. They refused to accept the story the town told itself. Silas Venn helped the keepers remove the problem, quietly, permanently enough to keep others quiet." I felt my throat tighten. Grief rose, sharp and immediate, but I forced it back down. Anger would be useful later, panic would not. "Then why am I here?" I asked. "Why the letter? Why now?" The caretaker slowed as the passage widened into a small chamber. In its center stood a stone pillar, carved with a spiral of names, older than the slab upstairs, worn smooth in places by centuries of touch. At its base was a shallow basin filled with water so clear it looked like air. Reflected in it was not our faces, but something else, shifting images, like scenes seen through fogged glass. "The gate opens in cycles," he said. "Every generation the balance shifts. The anchor, what we're approaching, begins to weaken. When that happens, the gate doesn't just open at midnight. It begins to reach for what it needs." "And what does it need?" Mara asked. The caretaker's expression tightened. "It needs a key," he said. "Not a physical key, a living one. Someone whose bloodline carries the memory of the first sealing. Someone who can choose consciously, freely, whether to bind the gate again or to open it fully." I stared at the basin. In its depths I saw a flash of my childhood home, Greyhaven in daylight, then in darkness, then filled with unfamiliar figures moving through rooms that felt like mine. I saw my mother standing in the library, holding a ledger, her face calm but determined. I saw my father arguing with someone whose face was hidden by shadow. I saw a bell ringing and the ground trembling. "You're saying I'm the key," I said. The caretaker met my eyes. "You may be," he said, "or you may refuse. Either choice has consequences. The keepers want certainty. They want you to step into the old role without understanding it. They'll offer you protection. They'll offer you power. And if you refuse, they'll try to make you disappear quietly like your parents." Mara's voice shook. "Then what's the anchor?" The caretaker lifted his lantern toward a narrow arch at the back of the chamber. Beyond it, the passage descended further and the air grew colder, wetter, as if we were approaching deep water. "The anchor is a mechanism," he said. "A structure built into the bedrock beneath Hollowgate. It holds the gate in place by balancing forces, memory, time, and sacrifice. If it fails, the gate won't close. It will widen. And what's on the other side will come through." As we moved toward the arch, I heard it again. The bell, closer now, as though the earth itself were ringing. The sound wasn't coming from above. It was coming from below, resonating through the stone. We descended. The walls changed, less carved, more natural, slick with moisture. The lantern light caught on veins of mineral running through the rock, pale and luminous like trapped starlight. The air smelled of iron and old water, and beneath it, something metallic and sharp that made my stomach turn. At last, we reached a vast underground space, a cavern shaped like a bell, its walls curving upward into shadow. In the center rose a column of stone, smooth and immense, wrapped in bands of metal that looked both ancient and carefully maintained. At the top of the column was a mechanism of gears and levers, half hidden behind a lattice of rusted iron. Hanging from it, suspended by chains, was a single object that drew my eye immediately. A small, dark key, shaped like a stylized bell, resting inside a cradle of crystal. The caretaker's voice was reverent. "The anchor key," he said. "It doesn't open doors, it balances the gate. When it's removed, the gate loses its restraint." Mara stepped closer, her eyes wide. "Then why isn't it guarded better?" The caretaker's jaw tightened. "Because the keepers don't guard it from the outside," he said. "They guard it from the inside by controlling who can reach it. They've built a system of fear. If anyone threatens the balance, they're labeled dangerous. If anyone seeks the truth, they're removed." A sound echoed across the cavern, footsteps, many of them, moving with purpose. The keepers had found the entrance. Torches flared in the passage behind us, casting long, distorted shadows across the bell-shaped walls. A voice called out, calm and authoritative, "Elena Ward, step away from the column." I turned and saw a figure step into the cavern, a tall man in a dark coat, his face lined with age, his eyes steady. Beside him stood a woman in the robes of the church, her expression tight with conviction. Behind them were others, town officials, shopkeepers, faces I had known all my life, each carrying a lantern, each wearing the same determined mask. "Silas Venn," I said, recognizing him from the photograph and the ledger. My voice shook, but I held it steady. "You're still here." Silas inclined his head, as if acknowledging an old acquaintance. "Still here," he said, "still doing what must be done." Mara's grip tightened on my arm. "Elena," she whispered, "they're not going to let us leave." Silas stepped forward, his gaze moving from me to the caretaker. "You've poisoned her mind," he said, "filled her with stories. She doesn't understand the cost of what she's doing." The caretaker's lantern swung, casting light across the column. "She understands enough," he said, "enough to see that you've been lying for generations." Silas's expression hardened. "Lying is a harsh word for preservation," he said. "Hollowgate survives because we make hard choices, because we protect the weak, because we keep the gate from consuming the town." "And what about my parents?" I demanded. "Was that preservation?" Silas's eyes flickered just for a moment, regret, calculation, something like guilt. "Your parents became a risk," he said. "They were going to expose the Accord. They were going to open the gate wider than it should ever be. We removed the risk. It was necessary." The cavern seemed to hold its breath. Even the bell's distant tolling felt muted, as if the stone itself was listening. I stepped toward the column, my hand hovering near the anchor key. The crystal cradle pulsed faintly, as if it recognized me. The caretaker tensed, ready to stop me or to help me. Silas raised a hand. "Don't," he said. "If you touch it, you'll destabilize everything, you'll doom us all." "And if I don't," I said, "you'll continue sacrificing people to keep your secret." The keepers moved forward, closing the distance. Torches cast their faces into sharp relief, fear, resolve, desperation. I realized then that they weren't villains in the simple sense. They were believers, convinced their suffering was the price of safety. That made them dangerous in a different way. The caretaker leaned close to me, his voice urgent. "Elena," he whispered, "you have two choices. Take the key and decide what it does, or run and buy time. But if you run, they will come after you and after Mara." I looked at Mara, at her trembling hands, at the ledger she held like a promise. I looked at the anchor key, suspended above the depths, beautiful and terrible. And I listened to the bell beneath us, tolling like a countdown. "What do I do?" I whispered. The choice beneath the stone. The tremor passed through the cavern like a held breath released. Dust, or something like dust, drifted down from the vaulted ceiling, catching in the lantern light. The anchor key hung above the stone column in its crystal cradle, untouched yet intensely present, as if it had been waiting for me since before I was born. The keepers advanced in a slow, practiced wave. Silas Venn at their center, the church woman at his shoulder, townspeople flanking them with torches and grim resolve. Behind me, the caretaker stood with his lantern lowered, ready to move, ready to sacrifice, ready to fight. Mara's voice was barely audible. "Elena, please, don't let them decide for you." Silas raised his hand again, palm outward, the gesture meant to be calming but landing like a command. "Step away from the column," he said. "This isn't about blame, it's about survival. The gate is older than your grief, older than your anger. If it breaks, Hollowgate breaks with it." I looked at the faces around him, people I'd known since childhood. The baker with flour on his apron, the postmaster who had once given me candy when I was small, the schoolteacher who had watched me grow up and then watched me leave. Each of them believed they were protecting something precious. Each of them was willing to do terrible things to keep believing it. And then I looked at the ledger in Mara's arms, at the names inside it, at the blank space waiting on the upper slab. My name, perhaps, if I accepted the old bargain. I thought of my parents' names already carved there, silent witnesses to a system that had decided their lives were expendable. "What happens?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear in my chest, "if I take the key?" Silas's jaw tightened. "You don't understand the balance," he said. "The key isn't a weapon, it's a restraint. If you remove it, the gate will open wider. It will begin to feed. It will take what it needs to stabilize itself." The caretaker stepped forward, his lantern casting light across the column's bands of metal. "That's only half the truth," he said. "The gate doesn't feed on flesh. It feeds on what the town refuses to face: memory, consequence, truth. The more you bury, the hungrier it becomes. The sacrifices were never necessary. They were a shortcut." Silas's eyes flicked to the caretaker, cold and sharp. "And you would have us face it all at once," he said. "You would have us collapse under the weight of what we've hidden." Mara's voice shook. "Maybe the town deserves to collapse," she said, surprising even herself. "Maybe it deserves to remember what it did." A murmur ran through the keepers: disapproval, fear, anger. The church woman stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Remembering is dangerous," she said. "Forgiveness is harder. The accord kept peace. It kept the valley safe." I felt something stir in the air around the column, as if the cavern itself was listening. The crystal cradle pulsed again, brighter this time, casting a soft, bell-like light across the stone. In that light I saw a vision, brief, vivid, undeniable. I saw Hollowgate as it had been before the accord, a town without fog, without fear, without the church bell's heavy shadow. People lived openly, argued openly, kept records openly. Then came the first sealing, an event marked by panic, by loss, by a desperate decision to bind something that had slipped through. The gate wasn't a punishment. It was an accident, a breach, a wound in reality. The accord had been born of fear, and fear had grown into a system. When the vision faded, my breath caught. I understood now that the keepers weren't merely protecting a secret. They were protecting themselves from the truth of what they had done to create the secret. Silas must have seen something in my face. "Don't," he said again, more urgently. "Don't open yourself to it. You'll destabilize everything." The caretaker's voice was quiet but firm. "Elena," he said, "the key is yours to choose. If you take it, you can bind the gate again properly with transparency. If you refuse it, the keepers will force the old pattern. If you destroy it," he hesitated, as if the thought itself was dangerous. "If you destroy it, the gate may open fully, but it may also free what's trapped on the other side." The cavern shook again, stronger this time. Somewhere beyond the column, a low sound rose. Not the bell, not footsteps, but a scraping, dragging noise, as if something immense was moving through stone. The keepers tightened their formation, torches trembling. Silas's calm mask slipped, revealing fear beneath. "Now," he said, and the word was not a request but an order. "Step away. We will take the key and end this." The caretaker moved instantly, placing himself between me and the advancing keepers. "Run," he told me, his voice urgent. "Take Mara. Get to the upper slab. If you can reach it before they reach the key, you can rewrite what's written there." Mara grabbed my arm. "Elena, please come on." I hesitated, my gaze fixed on the anchor key. The crystal cradle seemed to hum, inviting my touch. I felt a pull, not coercion exactly, but a sense of inevitability, as if my bloodline had been trained for this moment. The bell beneath us tolled again, and with it came a memory. My mother's face, calm and determined, holding the ledger in the library. Her voice echoed in my mind, not as sound but as certainty. "Choose with your eyes open." I made my decision. I stepped forward past the caretaker toward the column. Silas lunged, but the caretaker intercepted him, a sharp, desperate clash of bodies and lantern light. The cavern erupted into chaos, shouts, the clatter stone. Mara pulled me forward, her grip iron-hard. I reached the column and placed both hands on the crystal cradle. The moment my skin touched it, a shock ran through me, cold, electric, alive. The key responded, lifting slightly as if recognizing me. I felt the weight of generations, fear, sacrifice, silence, the town's desperate need to survive. And beneath it I felt something else. An intelligence on the other side of the gate, not malevolent, not kind, simply waiting, watching, learning. "Elena," Silas shouted, struggling against the caretaker. "Don't." I closed my eyes and listened to the bell. Not the sound, but the rhythm, steady, ancient, a heartbeat of the valley. I understood then that the key wasn't meant to be taken or hidden or destroyed. It was meant to be used to rebalance, to acknowledge, to integrate the truth rather than bury it. I lifted the key from the cradle. The cavern shuddered. The scraping sound beyond the column intensified, as if whatever moved in the dark had been given permission. The air turned colder, and the gate's presence pressed closer, an invisible hand against my mind, testing my resolve. I turned toward the passage that led upward, Mara at my side. The caretaker fought to hold the keepers back, his lantern swinging wildly, his voice shouting something I couldn't hear over the rising noise. Silas broke free and lunged for me, desperation in his eyes. "Elena," he pleaded, "you don't know what you're doing." "I know enough," I said, and my voice carried through the cavern with a steadiness that surprised me. "I know the old bargain is broken, and I know the town deserves the truth even if it hurts." I ran. The passage upward blurred around me as we sprinted, the bell tolling above us like a frantic alarm. Behind us, the cavern collapsed into chaos, shouts, the crash of stone, the caretaker's voice cut short by something I refused to imagine. The gate's presence followed us, hungry and curious, as if it had chosen a new course and I was the one holding the compass. We burst into the upper chamber beneath Greyhaven just as the church bell above us struck midnight again, 12 heavy chimes that shook the stone. The slab of names waited, the blank space calling to me. Mara set the ledger down, her hands trembling, and I stepped forward with the anchor key in my palm. The ash arch shimmered above the library beyond, the gate hovering between what was and what had been. And for the first time I felt not fear, but clarity. Whatever happened next, I would not be the town's sacrifice. I would be its reckoning. The rewriting of the bell. Midnight settled over Hollowgate like a weight. The church bell above us rang 12 times, each chime a nail driven into the old silence, and the stone slab beneath my feet trembled in response. The blank space carved into its surface seemed to widen, as if the slab itself had been waiting for my touch. Above, the ash arch shimmered in the library beyond, the gate hovering between what was and what had been, its surface like smoke stirred by an unseen hand. Mara stood beside me, the ledger open on the slab, her fingers shaking as she turned the brittle pages. The names of generations stared back at us, payments, oaths, silences, and signatures that had bought the town's peace with bloodless cruelty. My parents' names were there, carved not only into stone but into the town's memory as a warning. Silas Ven's signature repeated like a refrain, a promise that had hardened into control. I held the anchor key in my palm. It was cool, heavier than it looked, shaped like a stylized bell with a slender stem and a small notch that fit perfectly against the carved indentation at the center of the slab. The crystal cradle's faint bell light still pulsed along its edges, as if it recognized the key's purpose and feared what I might do with it. "Elena," Mara whispered, her voice tight, "if you put it in, what happens?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I know what happens if I don't. The keepers will take it back. They'll keep the old pattern. They'll keep sacrificing people to keep the gates stable." A sound echoed from the passage behind us, footsteps, uneven and urgent. The keepers were coming. Somewhere in the dark, I imagined Sila's Ven pushing forward, driven by desperation and the belief that control was the only way to prevent collapse. I imagined the caretaker, if he had survived, fighting to buy us time, his lantern swinging, his voice calling warnings into the stone. I had seconds. I placed the key into the indentation. The moment it seated, the slab responded with a deep, resonant hum. The carved names began to glow, not brightly, but with a steady, ancient light, like embers buried under ash. The hum rose into a tone that matched the church bell above, as if the slab and the tower were instruments tuned to the same frequency. The air in the chamber thickened, and the ash arch above us widened, its surface rippling like water. Mara gasped, "It's opening." "No," I said, though my certainty wavered. "It's waking." The ledger pages lifted as if caught in an invisible current, turning themselves toward the slab. Lines of text rearranged, old entries fading while new ones formed, names, dates, conditions, and most importantly, a new clause written in a hand that felt like mine but was not mine. It was the hand of the accord itself, responding to my choice. The new words appeared in careful, deliberate script. "The gate shall be maintained through truth, not silence. Sacrifice is forbidden. The key bearer is responsible for balance, not control. Transparency replaces secrecy. The bell shall sound only to warn, not to bind." As the clause settled into permanence, the old signatures, Silas's among them, began to blur, as if the stone was rejecting them. The chamber shuddered. Somewhere far above, the church bell faltered, its tolling interrupted as if the tower itself had been startled. Mara's voice shook with awe and fear. "Elena, you changed it." "I tried," I said. "I don't know if it's enough." A shout echoed from the passage. Silas Ven burst into the chamber, his coat torn, his face pale with exertion. Behind him came the church woman, 2 town officials, and a handful of others, faces I recognized, faces that had watched me grow up. Their torches cast wild light across the slab, and their expressions were a mix of anger, panic, and betrayal. "Stop," Silas demanded, his voice raw. "You don't understand what you've done." I stepped back from the slab, the anchor key still glowing in its notch, the new clause shining like a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. "I understand enough," I said. "I understand that the old accord fed on people, that it used fear to keep you loyal, that it made my parents disappear." Silas's eyes flicked to my parents' names, then back to me. "They were going to expose everything," he said. "They were going to open the gate fully. The town would have been destroyed." "And you decided that for them," I replied. "You decided that their lives were a price worth paying." The church woman stepped forward, her voice trembling with conviction. "We kept the valley safe," she said. "We kept children safe. We kept homes standing. What you've done, this rewriting, may undo all of that." Mara stepped between me and the keepers, holding the ledger like a shield. "Then let it be undone," she said. "Let Hollowgate face what it did. Let it choose honesty over fear." Silas's expression hardened. "You think honesty will save you," he said. "The gate is not a metaphor. It is a boundary. If you remove the old restraints without understanding what lies beyond, you invite something through that you cannot control." The ash arch above us rippled again, and for the first time I saw more than fog and stone. Through the shimmering surface, I glimpsed a landscape that felt both alien and familiar, a vast twilight plain under a bruised sky, lit by pale, drifting lights. In the distance stood structures, ruins, towers, bridges, half sunk in mist, as if they belonged to a world that had once touched Hollowgate and been severed. And moving among them were shapes, human-like, yet not quite human, watching, waiting, their attention turning toward our world as if the gate had become a window. A cold certainty settled over me. The gate was not a punishment created by the town. It was a breach, an accident perhaps, or a deliberate opening long ago, and the accord had been the town's desperate attempt to seal it. The sacrifices had been a misguided attempt to stabilize a wound that required healing, not binding. Silas stepped closer, lowering his voice as if he feared the gate would hear him. "There is something on the other side," he said. "Something that remembers Hollowgate, something that has been waiting for the gate to weaken. If you open it, if you remove the old fear, what comes through will not care about your morality, it will care about balance." I looked into his eyes and saw, for the first time, something beyond control, genuine fear, not for himself but for the town, for the people he had convinced himself he was protecting. "What do you suggest?" I asked. Silas hesitated, then spoke with difficulty as if admitting weakness. "We need a new system," he said. "Not secrecy, not sacrifice, a council of truth, a public record, a way to manage the gate without hiding it. But we need time, and we need the key to remain under guidance until we understand what we've awakened." Mara's voice was steady. "Then we do it openly," she said. "No more back rooms, no more midnight committees. The town deserves to know." A murmur ran through the keepers, uncertainty, doubt, the first cracks in their unity. The church woman looked at the slab, at the new clause, and her expression shifted from certainty to something like grief. "We believed we were doing God's work," she whispered. "We believed we were saving lives." "And we did," Silas said, his voice breaking slightly. "But we did it the wrong way." A sound echoed from the passage again, this time not footsteps but a low, scraping movement, as if something heavy was dragging itself toward us. The ash arch rippled violently, and the glimpse beyond sharpened. The twilight plain, the ruins, the watching shapes, closer now, as if they had sensed the change in the accord and were responding. The gate was no longer merely a boundary. It was a living threshold. "Elena," Mara said, urgent, "we can't stay here, whatever coming." "I know," I replied. I turned to Silas, the anchor key still in the slab. "We keep the key here," I said. "But we do it with witnesses, with a new council, with transparency, and we find out what's on the other side together before it finds its way through." Silas nodded once, a reluctant agreement that felt like the first honest thing he had done in years. The keepers shifted, uncertain, but no longer united in opposition. The town's old machinery of fear was breaking. I stepped toward the ash arch, not to cross it, but to study it, to understand it. As I approached, the gate's surface shimmered, and a voice, soft, distant, almost familiar, whispered through the air. "Elena Ward," it said, "you have opened the lock. Now you must decide what kind of door you want." The bell above us rang once more, not a command but a warning. The voice between worlds. The single bell note above us did not fade so much as settle into the valley, a lingering warning that made the rain outside sound heavier and the old stones of Greyhaven seem to lean inward. In the library beyond the ash arch, the gate hovered like a doorway cut into reality, its surface shimmering, translucent, revealing the twilight plain beyond. Bruised sky, drifting lights, half-sunken ruins, and distant figures that watched with patient intent. Mara stood close to me, the ledger clutched against her chest, her eyes fixed on the gate. "It spoke," she whispered. "It knew your name." I nodded, unable to take my gaze from the shifting landscape. The voice had been soft, almost intimate, like a memory surfacing in my own mind. "Elena Ward, you have opened the lock. Now you must decide what kind of door you want." The words carried no malice, only expectation. That made them more unsettling than a threat. Behind us, the upper chamber beneath Greyhaven had become a crowded, uneasy space. Silas then stood with the remaining keepers, their torches casting long, uncertain shadows. The church woman, Mother Sella, I learned her name was, held a small brass bell in her hand, as if it were a relic that could restore order. Town officials murmured among themselves, their faces tight with fear and the unfamiliar feeling of being asked to choose rather than obey. Silas approached me slowly as if he feared startling the gate. "Elena," he said, his voice controlled but strained, "you've changed the law of the valley. That's powerful. It's also dangerous. Whatever is on the other side will test your resolve." "I know," I replied. "That's why we do this openly. No more secret committees. No more midnight bargains. If the gate is real, the town deserves to understand it." Mother Sella's eyes shone with something like grief. "We believed secrecy was mercy," she said. "We believed it protected the innocent. Now I wonder what innocence we sacrifice to keep our peace." Mara stepped forward, her voice steadier than mine. "Then we start by telling the truth," she said. "We record what we know, we share it. We build a council that answers to the people, not to fear." Silas hesitated, then nodded, an admission that the old order had failed. "Agreed," he said. "But we do it carefully. We do it with witnesses, and we keep the anchor key in place until we understand what's on the other side." At that moment, the ash arch rippled again, and the voice returned, clearer now, as if it had been waiting for our conversation to reach a decision point. "Elena Ward," it said, "the gate is not your enemy. It is a threshold between what was and what remains. Beyond it lies the archive of Hollowgate, records older than your stone, older than your bell. It holds what your town has forgotten and what it has buried." The word *archive* landed with a strange familiarity. I remembered my mother standing in the library, holding a ledger with the same intensity I felt now. I remembered my father's voice, sharp, urgent, arguing with someone in the dark. Had they been trying to reach the archive? Had they been trying to retrieve something that could not be retrieved without consequence? Mara's breath caught. "An archive," she repeated. "Then the gate is a library." "Or a vault," Mother Sella murmured. "Or a prison." Silas's expression tightened. "Or a doorway that can be used," he said. "Used by whoever controls it." A murmur ran through the chamber. The implication was immediate. If the archive existed, it was valuable, dangerously valuable. Knowledge could be power. Power could be used to heal or to dominate. And in Hollowgate, the old power had always come from secrecy. "We need to see it," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "Not to cross recklessly, to understand, to decide what kind of door we want." Silas's eyes narrowed. "You propose a reconnaissance." "I propose a controlled approach," I replied. "A small party, witnesses, a clear plan. If the archive is real, it may explain why the gate opened in the first place. It may explain my parents." At the mention of my parents, something in the gate shifted, an almost imperceptible change, like a page turning in a vast book. The figures on the twilight plain moved, their attention focusing on us. One shape, taller than the others, draped in mist, seemed to incline its head as if acknowledging me. Mara shivered. "They're watching us," she said. "They've been watching," Silas corrected, "for a long time." Mother Sella stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Then we do this with humility," she said. "Not conquest, not fear. We ask permission, not demand access." The voice through the gate responded, as if it had heard her. "Permission is earned," it said. "Not given. Bring what you value, leave what you fear. The archive answers to truth." Silas's jaw tightened at the word **truth**, as if it were a blade. "And what does it want in return?" he asked. The gate rippled, and the landscape beyond shifted, revealing a broken bridge over a dark river, half submerged in fog. On the far side stood a tower with a bell-shaped roof, its surface covered in symbols that mirrored those carved into the slab beneath Greyhaven. Asterisk balance, the voice replied. The gate weakens when the town's memory is fractured. The archive will help you mend it if you are willing to face what you have done. A cold realization settled over me. The sacrifices, the disappearances, the silence, the payments, had not merely protected the gate. They had poisoned it. The gate was hungry because Hollowgate had fed it fear instead of honesty. "We need a plan," I said. "Tonight we gather witnesses, townspeople, officials, anyone willing to speak openly. We document what we know. We choose who crosses. And we set rules. No coercion, no secrets, no private bargains." Silas nodded, though I could see the struggle in him, his instinct for control warring with the necessity of transparency. "I'll help," he said, "but I need you to understand, there are others who won't. There are people who profit from the old system. There are families who built their lives around the lie." Myra's eyes widened. "Who?" Silas's gaze moved to the townspeople gathered in the chamber, faces I had known, trusted, feared. "Some are here," he said. "Some are still in the dark, and some may already be moving to stop us." As if summoned by his words, a sound echoed from the library above us, footsteps on the stairs, deliberate and heavy. The door to the lower chamber opened and a figure stepped through. A tall man with a calm face and a leather satchel, carrying a lantern that burned with an unnervingly steady flame. He was not from Hollowgate, at least, not from the Hollowgate I knew. His clothes were too clean, his manner too practiced, as if he belonged to a world that measured time differently. He looked at the ash arch, then at me, and his expression was one of quiet satisfaction. "Elena Ward," he said, "I've been looking for you." Silas stiffened. "Who are you?" The man set his lantern down and opened the satchel, revealing a small, sealed envelope marked with the same crest I had seen before. "Bell Gate, I. My name is Dr. Alaric Venn ***, he said. "Silas Venn is my brother." A ripple of shock ran through the chamber. Silas's face went pale. "Alaric," he said, as if the name itself was a threat. "You were supposed to stay away." Dr. Venn's eyes held mine. "I stayed away because you asked me to," he said. "Because you convinced me the truth would destroy the town. But you didn't tell me the whole truth. You didn't tell me what you did to Elena's parents." The chamber went silent. Even the gate seemed to pause as if listening. I stepped forward, my voice low. "What do you know?" Dr. Venn handed me the envelope. "I know where they were taken," he said, "and I know who ordered it, and I know that the archive doesn't just hold records, it holds a key to undoing what my brother helped create." Silas's voice broke. "Alaric, don't." Dr. Venn's expression softened, but his resolve did not. "It's too late for silence," he said. "The gate is waking. The town needs to choose. And you, Elena Ward, you need to know what really happened." I tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in handwriting I recognized. My mother, S. At the bottom was a date and a final line that made my blood run cold. "If you find this, Elena, don't trust Silas. The gate can be healed, but not by fear. Go to the archive, find the first seal. And remember, the bell is a warning, not a cage." The ash arch shimmered, and the voice returned, as if it had been waiting for that exact sentence. "The first seal," it said. "Yes, that is where your journey begins. Into the archive of Hollowgate." The envelope trembled in my hand as if the paper itself had been waiting to pass along a burden. My mother's handwriting, small, careful, almost childlike, was unmistakable, and the final line cut through years of confusion with surgical precision. "Don't trust Silas. The gate can be healed, but not by fear. Go to the archive. Find the first seal. And remember, the bell is a warning, not a cage." The ash arch above us shimmered, its surface like disturbed water under moonlight. Beyond it, the twilight plain stretched away into mist, the half-sunken ruins and drifting lights more vivid now, less a glimpse, more an invitation. The voice returned, patient and precise. "The first seal," it said. "It is not a lock, it is an agreement. Find it and you will understand what Hollowgate was meant to be. Mara stood at my side, her eyes wide, the ledger hugged to her chest as if it were a talisman. "Elena," she whispered, "your mother knew. She knew what Silas did. She knew what the town did." Silas Ven's face had gone gray. He stood among the keepers, but he was no longer their unchallenged center. The chamber had become a place of shifting loyalties. Some townspeople looked to him still, desperate for the old certainty. Others looked to me, to Mara, to Mother Sella, to the open ledger, hungry for honesty. And now Dr. Alaric Venn, Silas's brother, stood between us like a blade of truth, calm and immovable. Silas's voice came out hoarse. "Alaric, you don't understand what you're doing." Alaric's gaze did not waver. "I understand enough," he said. "I understand you convinced me to stay away while you built a system of fear. I understand you used my name, my reputation, to make the lie look legitimate. And I understand that Elena's parents were trying to undo it." Mother Sella stepped forward, her small brass bell in hand. "Then we choose a new way," she said. "Not vengeance, not chaos. A council, witnesses, transparency, and a careful approach to the archive, because whatever is beyond that gate will demand responsibility." I looked at the gathered faces, neighbors, officials, the baker, the postmaster, the schoolteacher. Fear was still there, but so was something else: resolve. Hollowgate was beginning to remember how to decide for itself. "We form a council tonight," I said. 7 people, 3 from the town, 2 from those who once served the keepers, 1 from the church, 1 chosen by me. We record everything. We set rules. And we select a small party to enter the archive, not to cross blindly, but to learn. Silas's shoulders sagged as if the weight of years had finally caught up with him. "I will serve," he said, "not to lead, to answer, to make amends." A murmur of surprise ran through the chamber. Even Mara looked uncertain. "Can we trust him?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I know we can't keep him in the dark either. If he's part of the story, he needs to be part of the reckoning." Alaric stepped forward. "I will go with you," he said. "I've studied the gate's history, what little there is. I know the old symbols, I know the risks, and I know where to look for the first seal." Mother Sella nodded. "I will go as well," she said, "not to command but to bear witness, to remind us that this is not a conquest but a search for meaning." Mara's voice was steady. "I'm going," she said. "I'm the one who brought the ledger. I'm the one who knows how this town hides its truths. I won't let it hide from me again." I looked at them, 3 people willing to step into the unknown with me, and felt a fragile sense of hope. "Then we go," I said, "but we go with rules. No one crosses alone. No one touches anything without consensus. We leave markers, we take notes, and if the archive asks for something in return, we consider it together." The ash arch rippled, and the voice responded, almost approving. "Good," it said. "The archive answers to intention. Bring humility, bring clarity, bring what you value most, and be prepared to examine it." I stepped toward the gate. The air near it was colder, carrying the scent of wet stone and distant rain. As I crossed the threshold, the sensation was not of falling, but of passing through a curtain of memory. The library behind me faded. The twilight plain unfolded around me in slow, deliberate layers. The ground was uneven, paved with cracked stone veined with pale mineral light. Ruins rose on either side: walls, archways, collapsed towers, half submerged in mist. In the distance, a river ran dark and wide, its surface like polished obsidian. Across it, the tower with the bell-shaped roof stood tall, its carvings glowing faintly, echoing the symbols beneath Greyhaven. Alaric followed, his lantern casting a warm circle of light. Mother Sella came next, her bell held close, her breathing steady. Mara followed, clutching the ledger, her eyes scanning the landscape as if it might rearrange itself at any moment. "This place," Alaric said softly, "is older than Hollowgate, older than the valley. The gate is not a door between towns, it's a seam between layers of reality. The archive sits at the point where memory becomes structure." Mara shivered. Memory becomes structure, she repeated. So the town's secrets became part of the gate. Yes, Alaric said. Every time Hollowgate buried a truth, the gate tightened. Every time someone was sacrificed to keep the old order, the archive learned fear. That's why it speaks to you now. It recognizes a chance to rebalance. Mother Sella looked toward the distant tower, and the first seal. Alaric pointed to the river. It lies beneath the bridge, he said, or rather within it. The bridge is not a crossing, it's a mechanism. The first seal is the agreement that first stabilized the gate. If we find it, we can understand how it was made, and how it can be renewed without fear. As we moved toward the river, the figures we had seen before, human-like yet indistinct, watched from the ruins. They did not approach. They did not threaten. They simply observed as if we were being assessed. The air grew colder, and I felt the gate's attention sharpen, like a hand hovering near my thoughts. A low sound echoed across the plain. Not the church bell, but a deeper tone, resonant and ancient, as if the archive itself was sounding a note. The bridge ahead shimmered, revealing layers of its construction, stone over something else, translucent and alive. Symbols carved into its surface glowed in sequence, forming a pattern that matched the slab beneath Greyhaven. Alaric stopped at the bridge's edge, his lantern light trembling. "This is it," he said. "The first seal is encoded here, but it's protected. If we touch it incorrectly, we may trigger a reset, an automatic resealing that could undo everything we've changed." Mara's voice was tight. "Then how do we open it?" Alaric looked at me. "You," he said, "the key bearer. The archive responds to you because your bloodline is tied to the first sealing. You must read the symbols, not with your eyes alone, but with your intention, with honesty." Mother Sella stepped forward, holding her bell. "Then we pray," she said, "not for control, for clarity." I stepped onto the bridge. The moment my foot touched the stone, the symbols flared, and the air around me filled with images, flashes of Hollowgate's earliest days. A breach in reality, panic, desperate hands carving stone, a first agreement written in fear. I saw faces I didn't know, heard voices arguing, felt the terror that drove them to bind the gate rather than understand it. And then I saw something else. A shadow moving among them, guiding the fear, encouraging the sacrifice, shaping the accord into a tool of control. A figure with a calm face and a familiar presence. Someone who had been there from the beginning, not as a hero, but as an architect of the system. The vision snapped away, leaving me breathless. Alaric's voice was urgent. "Elena, what did you see?" "A manipulator," I said, my voice shaking. "Someone who used the first crisis to create the Keeper's power. Someone who made fear the price of safety." Alaric's expression darkened. "Then the first seal isn't just a mechanism," he said. "It's a record of the original betrayal, and whoever planted it may still be influencing Hollowgate." As I steadied myself, the bridge's symbols aligned, and a hidden panel slid open beneath my feet, revealing a chamber of pale light and floating script, an interface of the archive itself. In its center hovered a sphere of crystal, etched with the bell, the gate, the eye. The voice spoke again, closer now, almost intimate. "Elena Ward," it said, "you have found the first seal. Now you must decide. Do you preserve the old agreement, or do you replace it with something that can survive truth?" From the shadows beyond the chamber, a new presence emerged, silent, deliberate, and watching. It did not belong to the archive's patient observers. It belonged to Hollowgate's old order, and it had followed us through the gate. A voice, low and satisfied, spoke from the dark. "Choose carefully," it said, "because once you change the seal, you change who controls the gate." The first seal, and the hand behind it. The hidden chamber beneath the bridge glowed with a pale, steady light that felt neither warm nor cold, simply present, as if the archive itself were holding its breath. Floating script drifted across the air like ash suspended in water, forming symbols, names, dates, and fragments of agreements long forgotten. At the chamber's heart hovered a crystal sphere etched with the familiar triad: bell, gate, eye. Its surface pulsed faintly, responding to my proximity, to my uncertainty, to the weight of my mother's warning still echoing in my mind. Mara stood just behind me, the ledger pressed to her chest, her eyes wide with awe and fear. Alaric then held his lantern high, its light catching on the floating script, his expression focused but strained, like a scholar watching a manuscript come alive. Mother Sella held her brass bell close, her lips moving in a silent prayer that sounded like an attempt to steady her own courage. From the shadows beyond the chamber's threshold, the new presence emerged, a tall figure wrapped in dark cloth, face obscured by a hood that did not quite hide the shape of a calm, practiced gaze. The voice that spoke was low, satisfied, and intimate, like someone who had been waiting for years to be heard. "Choose carefully," it said, "because once you change the seal, you change who controls the gate." Alaric's lantern swung, casting long, distorted shadows across the sphere. "Show yourself," he demanded, his voice controlled but edged with anger. "You've been shaping Hollowgate from the beginning. I can feel it." The hooded figure stepped into the light. When the cloth shifted, I saw a face I recognized, not from the town square, not from Greyhaven's halls, but from old records. Sharp features, composed expression, eyes that had watched generations pass without changing. It was Hector Vale ***, the last surviving member of a family that had once held the town's most powerful offices. Mayor, magistrate, church trustee. Names that appeared again and again in the margins of the accord, always close to Silas Ven's signature. Mara's breath caught. "Vale," she whispered. He's the reason the keepers existed." Hector Vale inclined his head as if acknowledging a long-overdue introduction. "The keepers existed to preserve balance," he said, "to prevent panic, to keep the valley safe. Your parents, Elena, threatened that balance. They were going to open the gate fully, recklessly, without understanding what it would release." My throat tightened, "And you decided they were expendable." Vale's expression did not change. "I decided the many outweighed the few," he said. "The town has survived because we made hard choices, because we kept the truth contained, because we prevented the archive from being treated like a weapon." Alaric's voice trembled with restrained fury. "You didn't prevent it from being treated like a weapon," he said. "You turned it into a leash. You used fear to bind the gate tighter, and you used people's lives to pay for it." Vale's gaze moved to the crystal sphere. "Fear is not the problem," he said. "Fear is a signal. It tells you when something is dangerous. What you call truth can be just as dangerous when it arrives too soon, too violently." Mother Sella stepped forward, her voice gentle but unwavering. "Truth is not violence," she said. "Truth is light. If we have hidden it, we have hidden ourselves from God and from each other." Vale looked at her with something like pity. "Faith," he said, "is not incompatible with control. It is often the reason people accept it." The chamber seemed to hold its breath. Even the floating script paused, as if the archive was listening to the argument as closely as we were. I stepped closer to the sphere, my hand hovering near its surface. The etched symbols, bell, gate, eye seemed to shift when I looked at them too long, rearranging into a sequence that felt like a question. In my mind, the vision from the bridge returned. The first sealing, the panic, the hands carving stone, the shadow guiding the fear. Vale had been there, not as a reluctant participant, but as an architect, someone who had learned how to use the town's terror to secure power. "Elena," Mara whispered, urgent, "don't let him steer you." Vale's voice softened, almost intimate. "I'm not steering you," he said. "I'm warning you. If you replace the first seal with a new agreement, one built on transparency, one built on public memory, you may destabilize the gate. The archive will demand balance. It may demand an exchange." Alaric's eyes narrowed. "An exchange," he repeated. "What kind of exchange?" Vale's hood shifted as he looked toward the distant river and the bell tower beyond. "The gate does not feed on flesh," he said. It feeds on coherence. It feeds on the town's ability to hold itself together. If you expose every buried truth at once, the town may fracture. People may panic. The valley may suffer. The gate may widen to take what it needs. Mother Sella's voice shook. So you would have us keep secrets forever? Vale's answer was calm. I would have you do it wisely, he said. A covenant, not chaos. A controlled release of truth. A measured remembrance. A new counsel, but one that understands the risks. I felt the sphere's pulse beneath my fingertips, as if it were responding to my thoughts. The archive was not asking for secrecy. It was asking for responsibility. It was asking whether Hollowgate could face its history without breaking itself apart. I turned to the others, Mara, Alaric, Mother Sella, each of them holding a different piece of the truth, each of them willing to pay a different price for it. We can't go back, I said. The old system is dead, but we can't rush into a new one blindly. We need a covenant, one that replaces fear with accountability. Vale's expression tightened as if he feared losing his leverage. A covenant, he said. Good, but it must be binding, it must be enforced, and it must include limits on what the archive can demand. Alaric stepped forward, his voice firm. Limits, he said, but not secrecy. We record the first seal's history publicly. We expose your role, Hector Vale. We dismantle the keeper's structure. And we build a new system where the gate is managed by the town, not by a hidden hand. Vale's calm mask slipped, revealing something sharper: anger, fear, desperation. You don't understand what you're doing, he said. The archive will not be managed. It will be negotiated, and it will take it needs. At that moment the sphere flared, casting the chamber into stark relief. The floating script rearranged into a new sequence, an outline of a covenant, a set of principles, a promise of transparency, asterisk, balance requires sacrifice of ego, not of people. The bell gate I rotated in harmony as my thoughts. I placed my hand fully against the sphere. The chamber shuddered. The script surged around me, and I felt the archive's presence settle over my mind like a careful hand, testing my resolve, weighing. Hollowgate's future paths branching like roots, one path darkened by renewed secrecy, another brightened. In each path the gate responded differently, tightening, widening, or settling into a stable, watchful threshold as if he meant to seize it. Alaric intercepted him, a sharp, desperate struggle, lantern lights swinging, shadows leaping across the stone. Mother Sella rang her bell, the sound cutting the air and slowing the chaos. Stop! My voice carrying through the archive's resonance's hood fell back as he fought, revealing his face fully, calm no longer but furious. You think the town will forgive what you expose. You don't understand how fragile it is, why we stop lying to it. I focused on the sphere and with a deliberate, conscious script into a new seal, a covenant of transparency, accountability, and shared stewardship. As I completed it, the sphere's light steadied, and the floating script condensed into a single, what Hollowgate had done and what it chose next. Vale collapsed against the stone, breathing of change the lock, he said. But you haven't changed what's on. The voice of the archive returned, calm and clear. The gate is now a bridge must be crossed with care. The first seal is renewed. Now you must face Rose, like the first note of a great bell being struck far away. The twilight the bridge shifted and the distant tower's carvings flared as if the archiving me. Elena, she whispered, what's coming? I looked out toward the bell tower and the dark river, and felt the gate's attention now not on fear, but no, I said, but whatever it is lying to itself. The bridge to what remains. The renewed first seal settled into the archive like a deep breath held and finally released. The floating script condensed into a single, luminous record, an open ledger of Hollowgate's history, its buried choices, its payments, its disappearances, and the precise moment fear had been made law. The crystal sphere's light steadied, and the bell, gate, I rotated in a calm, deliberate rhythm, as if the archive had accepted the new covenant and was now watching to see whether the town could live up to it. Mara stood beside me, her hands still trembling, The old ledger pressed to her chest as if it were a relic she could no longer bear to let go. Alaric then held his lantern steady, its flame unwavering, his gaze fixed on the sphere with the intensity of a man seeing his life's work finally take shape. Mother Sella rang her brass bell once, softly, reverently, its note hanging in the air like a vow. Hector Vale slumped against the stone, breathing hard, his hood fallen back to reveal a face that had once been composed and now looked weathered by years of self-justifying certainty. "You've changed the lock," he rasped, "but you haven't changed what's on the other side." The archive's voice returned, calm and clear, carrying the weight of something older than Hollowgate itself. "The gate is now a bridge," it said. "A bridge must be crossed with care. The first seal is renewed. Now you must face what remains." As it spoke, the distant bell tower beyond the river flared with light, its carvings glowing in a sequence that mirrored the renewed covenant. The bridge beneath our feet shifted subtly, as if it were preparing to carry us forward. The twilight plain seemed to lean in, and the watching figures in the ruins, human-like, yet not human, moved with purpose, their attention no longer merely observing but guiding, as if they were part of the archive's mechanism. Myra's voice was small. "What remains?" The archive answered without hesitation. "The memory of what Hollowgate severed," it said. "The lives that were taken, the choices that were made, the truth that was traded for safety. You must retrieve what was lost, not to punish the past but to heal the present." A cold realization settled over me. My parents hadn't simply disappeared. They had been taken into the archive, into this layered reality, because they had come too close to understanding the gate's purpose and Vale's role in maintaining the old order. The sacrifices had not only protected the town, they had fed the gate a diet of silence, making it hungry, making it demanding. Alaric's voice was tight with emotion. "Then we can bring them back," he said, "or at least understand what happened." Vale's eyes flicked toward the river, toward the bell tower, as if he could see something we could not. "You can't," he said, "not without paying the price the gate requires. The archive doesn't release what it holds unless balance is restored, and balance requires exchange." Mother Sella's face paled. "Exchange," she repeated. "What kind of exchange?" Vale's voice dropped, almost tender in its certainty. "The gate demands coherence," he said. "It demands that the town's story be made whole. If you reveal everything at once, you risk breaking the town. If you do it carefully, you may save it. But you must choose how much truth you can carry together." I looked at the renewed record hovering in the air. Names, dates, payments, silences, the blank spaces that had once been filled with fear. I saw my parents' names, still present, still marked, but no longer condemned. The covenant had changed the meaning of those names from warnings to witnesses. "We don't keep secrets," I said, "but we do it with structure. We bring the truth into the open in a way that strengthens the town, not fractures it. We create a public archive, above ground, in the light, so the gate is no longer the only place where Hollowgate's history lives." Alaric nodded. "Agreed," he said. "And we do it with witnesses, with a town meeting, with sworn statements, with a council that answers to the people." Vale's expression tightened. "And what of me?" he asked. Mara stepped forward, her voice steady. "You answer," she said. "You tell the truth. You face the consequences. No more private bargains, no more midnight committees, no more deciding who lives and who disappears." Vale's calm facade cracked further. "You think the town will forgive me," he said. "You don't understand how fragile it is. People need certainty. They need someone to blame. They need a story that lets them sleep at night." Mother Sella's voice was quiet but firm. "Then we give them a better story," she said. "One that includes repentance, restitution, and change." We turned our attention back to the bridge. The archive's voice guided us forward. "Cross," it said, "not to escape Hollowgate but to return to it whole. The bell tower is the hinge. The river is the threshold. The first seal is the promise. Keep it." We stepped onto the bridge. The stone beneath our feet felt alive, warm with stored memory, responsive to our intentions. The river below was dark and wide, its surface like polished obsidian, reflecting the bruised sky and the drifting lights of the plain. As we crossed, images rose from the water, faces of people I had never met, townsfolk from generations past, their voices overlapping, arguments, prayers, accusations, confessions. The river was not a boundary. It was a repository, carrying Hollowgate's collective memory. At the far side, the bell tower rose tall, its carvings glowing with the Covenant's symbols. Inside, a central chamber held a mechanism of gears, bells, and suspended weights, an instrument designed to measure balance, to sound warnings, to regulate the gate's opening and closing. At its heart hung a smaller version of the anchor key, resting in a cradle of crystal, its light steady and calm. The archive's voice resonated through the chamber. "This is the hinge," it said. "When the town is coherent, the gate remains a bridge. When it fractures, the gate becomes a wound. The bell sounds not to bind, but to remind." Alaric approached the mechanism, his hands trembling with reverence. "This is how it worked," he said. "Not through fear, through awareness. The old keepers perverted it, turned it into a tool of control." Vale's voice was barely audible. "I didn't build it," he said. "I inherited it. I learned how to keep it stable. I learned how to keep people from asking the wrong questions." Mother Sella stepped forward, placing her brass bell beside the mechanism as if offering it into a greater purpose. "Then we return it to its true function," she said. "A warning, not a weapon." I reached for the small anchor key. The moment my fingers touched it, the tower responded, bells chiming softly, gears turning with precision, the river below reflecting the new pattern of light. In my mind, I felt the gate's presence shift. It was no longer hungry, no longer waiting to consume. It was attentive, watchful, ready to be negotiated. And then, from the shadows at the edge of the chamber, a new sound arose, footsteps, many of them moving with purpose. The figures we had seen in the ruins had followed us, not as enemies but as guardians or witnesses. Behind them came Hollowgate's people, those we had left above ground, now crossing the threshold in a steady stream, drawn by the bell's new tone and the promise of truth. Silas then stepped forward, his face lined with exhaustion, his eyes clear for the first time. "Elena," he said, "the town is here. They want to see what you've done. They want to understand what we did. They want to choose." Vale rose, his expression torn between fear and a desperate need to regain control. "You can't let them see it all at once," he said. "They'll panic. They'll tear themselves apart." I looked at the gathered townspeople, neighbors, families, children, the old and the young, each carrying their own grief, their own guilt, their own hope. I looked at the renewed record, at the open ledger of what had been done. And I understood what the archive had been asking for all along. Not secrecy, not sacrifice, but shared responsibility ***. "We show them what they can bear," I said. "We tell the story in layers. We build a public archive above ground. We hold town meetings. We make room for anger, for mourning, for forgiveness. And we keep the gate as a bridge, monitored, transparent, accountable." Vale's shoulders sagged as if the last thread of his power had snapped. "Then I will confess," he said. "I will face the town. I will answer for what I did." Alaric's voice was steady. "And we will ensure it," he said. "No more private hands on the gate. No more hidden committees. The bell will sound warnings, not commands." Mother Sella rang her bell again, and the chamber filled with a clean, resonant note that echoed out into the plain and back into Hollowgate. The gate shimmered, and through it I saw Greyhaven's library, changed now, lit with purpose, filled with people reading, recording, choosing. The archive's voice spoke one final time, almost tender. "The bridge holds," it said. "Hollowgate has chosen coherence over fear. Now you must live with it." As we crossed back through the gate, I carried the small anchor key, not as a weapon, not as a secret, but as a promise. The town followed, and for the first time in generations, Hollowgate stepped into its own history with open eyes. The bell above Greyhaven rang again, this time not a command but a warning, a reminder, a call to remember. The light we build together. The library at Greyhaven had become something it had never been in my lifetime, a living room for the town. People filled every available space, standing between shelves, perched on chairs, leaning against tables, silent at first, as if they were afraid their voices would disturb what had been awakened. Lanterns and lamps cast warm pools of light across the dust and the paper, turning the old room into a kind of sanctuary. The ash arch still shimmered at the far end, the gate hovering between worlds, but its menace had softened into vigilance. It was no longer a mouth waiting to swallow secrets. It was a bridge under watch. I placed the small anchor key on the desk where the map of ashes had once waited. It rested there like a promise made tangible, cool, steady, engraved with the bell, the gate, the eye. Beside it lay my mother's note, the ledger Mara had carried like a shield, and the newly formed record of the first seal's history. A public document now, written in multiple hands, signed by witnesses, sealed not by fear but by consent. Mara stood near me, her posture calmer than it had been for days, though her eyes still held the strain of everything we had carried. She had become the town's quiet architect, organizing pages, guiding people to speak, ensuring that no voice was louder than the collective need for truth. "This is what it should have been," she murmured. "A place where the town can see itself." Alaric Venn moved among the people with the careful authority of someone who had spent his life trying to understand what others preferred to forget. He explained the gate's mechanism in plain language, not as a weapon but as a system. The bell as warning, the key as balance, the archive as a living record that responded to coherence. He answered questions patiently, even when they were sharp, even when they came from grief. Silas Venn stood near the edge of the gathering, no longer at the center but no longer exiled either. His face was lined with exhaustion, his voice quieter than I remembered. When people looked at him, they saw not a villain but a man who had chosen control over courage and who now faced the cost of that choice. "I believed I was protecting you," he said, addressing the room. "I was wrong. I let fear become law. I will not ask for forgiveness. I will ask for the chance to make what amends I can." A ripple moved through the crowd, anger, disbelief, sorrow, reluctant acceptance. Hollowgate had lived with the old story for too long to abandon it overnight. But the presence of the gate, the open record, the renewed first seal, these were proof that the old story could be rewritten. Hector Vale sat beneath the chandelier, wrists loosely bound, guarded by two townspeople who had volunteered for the task. He looked diminished but not broken. His calm had returned not as authority but as calculation. When he spoke, it was to the room, not to me alone. "I did what I did because I feared collapse," he said. "I feared panic. I feared that the truth would undo the valley. I convinced myself the ends justified the means. I was wrong. I used the gate as a leash. I used people as currency. I will answer for it." A murmur rose, some demanded harsh punishment. Others demanded understanding. Many simply demanded clarity. Mother Sella stepped forward, her brass bell in hand, her voice carrying the steadiness of someone who had learned how to hold faith without using it as a shield. "We will not answer cruelty with cruelty," she said. "We will answer it with justice, measured, public, accountable, and we will ensure that no one ever again has the power to decide who disappears." The town voted openly, without secret ballots, with witnesses and record keepers. A council was formed, 7 people chosen for their integrity, their willingness to speak plainly, and their refusal to profit from silence. Silas was included, not as a leader but as a witness and a penitent. Vale was included only as a subject of investigation, stripped of influence. A public archive was established in the old meeting hall, bright windows, open shelves, a room designed for daylight and honesty. A new practice was adopted: regular town assemblies, where the gate's condition would be discussed, where warnings would be shared, where decisions would be made with eyes open. And then came the part that made my throat tighten, the naming of what had been lost. One by one, people spoke of family members who had vanished, of debts never paid, of rumors that had hardened into facts, of fear that had become routine. The ledger Mara had carried became the foundation of a larger record, names added, stories collected, gaps acknowledged. My parents' names were spoken aloud, not as warnings but as witnesses. The town learned in detail how Vale and the keepers had manipulated the accord to maintain control, how Silas had been drawn into the system, how the gate had been fed silence until it demanded attention. As the stories unfolded, the ash arch shimmered, not with menace, but with response. The archive's presence seemed to lean into the room, as if it were listening to Hollowgate's attempt to become coherent. The small anchor key on the desk pulsed faintly, a steady rhythm that matched the town's growing clarity. Late in the evening, Vale requested a private audience with me. The council agreed with conditions: witnesses, a record, no coercion. I met him in a side room off the library, Mara and Alaric beside me, Mother Sella standing nearby with her bell. Vale's voice was controlled, but his eyes betrayed him: fear, regret, something like desperation. "You think you've won," he said, "but the gate will always demand balance. If the town cannot hold itself together, it will widen. It will take what it needs." I looked at him steadily. "Then we will hold ourselves together," I said. "We will build systems that make fear harder to use. We will teach the next generation what secrecy costs. We will keep the gate as a bridge, monitored, transparent, accountable." Vale's expression tightened. "And what of the archive beyond?" he asked. "What of what remains? There are answers there, answers about why the gate opened, why it chose Hollowgate, why it responds to your bloodline. If you refuse to ask those questions, you may be leaving the valley vulnerable." Alaric's voice was firm. "We will ask those questions," he said, "but we will ask them openly, not as a secret project, not as a private hunt, as a town decision." Vale nodded once as if he had expected that answer. "Then I have one last request," he said. "Let me help within limits. Let me face what I helped create. Let me contribute to the record. Let me try to make amends." Mara's voice was quiet but sharp. "You can help," she said, "by telling the truth, by accepting justice, by never again deciding who lives in shadow." Vale's shoulders sagged. "Agreed," he said, and for the first time there was no performance in his voice, only exhaustion and a reluctant honesty. As the night wore on, the library transformed from a crowded room of fear into a place of shared purpose. People began to read the new archive aloud, to correct mistakes, to add what had been missing, to build a story that included grief without surrendering to it. The gate's shimmer softened, and through it I saw not a threatening landscape but a watchful one: ruins that felt like memory, lights that felt like guidance, a distant bell tower that felt like a guardian. Before dawn I stepped to the desk and touched the small anchor key. In my mind I felt the gate's presence respond, not as command but as acknowledgement. Hollowgate had chosen coherence over fear. The bridge held. And yet, as I looked toward the ash arch, I sensed that the deepest mystery remained. What the archive truly wanted from us, why it had responded so strongly to my bloodline, and what balance would ultimately require. The gate was no longer a secret. It was a responsibility, and responsibilities, I knew, were not finished when the first hard choices were made. Epilogue: The Bridge That Remains. The first year after the gate's reckoning passed like a season that refused to repeat itself. Hollowgate changed slowly, then all at once, like a river finding a new channel. The old meeting hall became the Hollowgate Public Archive ***, bright with daylight, open to every citizen, guarded not by secrecy but by procedure. People came not only to read but to add: letters, photographs, family stories, corrections, confessions, and hopes. The ledger Mara had carried, once a shield, now a cornerstone, rested in a glass case beneath a plaque that read, simply, "Truth is not a weapon, it is a responsibility." The ash arch in Greyhaven's library remained, but its shimmer had softened into something like patience. The gate no longer loomed as a threat. It stood as a bridge under watch, its surface a quiet window onto the archive's twilight plain. The small anchor key stayed on the desk, not hidden, not worshipped, kept as a reminder that balance required attention, not fear. Each month the town gathered to review the gate's condition. Warnings were recorded, decisions were made, and the bell above the church sounded only when it needed to, an alert, not a command. Hector Vale's trial was not a spectacle. It was a process. Witnesses testified openly, records were examined in public, the council listened without rushing to punishment. Vale confessed fully, not as a performance but as a man finally facing the cost of his choices. He was stripped of influence, barred from positions of authority, and assigned restitution. He worked in the archive, organizing documents, verifying claims, and helping to ensure that no private hand could ever again shape the town's history. Some people could not forgive him. Others could not forget. But the town did not allow him to disappear, nor did it allow him to dominate. Justice in Hollowgate became something shared. Silas Venn walked a quieter road. He chose humility over prominence, serving as a liaison between the archive and the council, explaining the old mechanisms without defending the old methods. His redemption was not dramatic. It was steady, small acts of honesty, consistent transparency, a refusal to retreat into the comfort of control. In time, the town learned to see him as a warning and a lesson rather than a villain, a reminder that fear can masquerade as duty, and that duty requires courage. Mother Sella remained a steady presence, her brass bell a familiar sound in meetings, calling attention, not demanding obedience. She helped the town build rituals that honored grief without feeding it, memorial days for the lost, public readings of the archive's most difficult pages, and moments of silence that did not become silence as law. Her faith became a bridge, not a wall. Mara Keene became the archive's heart. She curated its growth, taught others how to document without distortion, and ensured that every story, no matter how painful, was treated with care. She and I often sat in the library late at night, reading new editions, listening to the town's voice change over time. "We didn't erase what happened," she said once. "We learned how to carry it." And I, Elena Ward, found my own path through the wreckage. The key-bearer role did not make me a savior. It made me a steward. I visited the gate when needed, not to command it but to listen, to the archive's quiet guidance, to the bell's measured warnings, to the town's shifting needs. I learned that my parents' disappearance was not a simple tragedy. It was a fracture that had demanded repair. Their courage, asking questions, refusing the old bargain, became part of the archive's foundation. Their names were spoken with sorrow, yes, but also with pride. They had tried to open eyes when the town preferred darkness. I chose to stay in Hollowgate, at least for now. Greyhaven remained my home, but it was no longer a fortress of memory. It was a place where the past could be examined without being worshipped. I began teaching, quietly at first, then more openly, helping others understand the gate's history, the cost of secrecy, and the power of collective truth. I wrote a small book from the archive's materials, not to sensationalize but to preserve. A careful record of what had been done, what had been learned, and what must never be repeated. One evening, as the sun set behind the valley and the church bell rang its familiar warning tone, I stood at the ash arch and looked through it. The twilight plain beyond was still there, ruins, drifting lights, the distant bell tower, but it no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a shared inheritance. The archive's voice, when it spoke, was calm and measured. "The bridge holds," it said. "Hollowgate has chosen coherence. Continue to tend what you have built." I nodded, not as an answer to command, but as an acknowledgement of responsibility. And then, as I turned back toward the library, I noticed something new on the desk, an inscription that had not been there the day before. It was small, precise, written in a hand that was not mine and yet felt familiar, as if it belonged to the archive itself. "The first seal is renewed. The next threshold is not a gate, It is a question. I stared at it, a quiet thrill running through me. The mystery had not ended. It had simply deepened into a new shape, not a hidden door demanding sacrifice, but a question inviting understanding. What was the next threshold? Who, or what, was still watching, still learning, still guiding? And what would Hollowgate become when it finally stopped fearing its own history and began to shape its future with open eyes? Mara joined me, reading the inscription over my shoulder. "So it's not over," she said, a small smile breaking through the seriousness of her face. "No," I replied, "it's just beginning again." The bell above Greyhaven rang once more, softly, a reminder that the valley would always need vigilance, that truth would always require care, and that the bridge, once built, must be tended. And in that tender, unfinished moment, I felt a strange peace. Not the peace of certainty, but the peace of a town that had learned how to face its own story and how to keep walking forward. Below is asterisk, next in the form of a asterisk strong opening for a sequel / book 2, tilde 1,500 2,000 words, picking up after the epilogue with a fresh hook while honoring the foundation you've built. It continues Elena's role as key bearer, deepens the mystery of the archive's next threshold, and introduces a new external pressure that forces Hollowgate to confront what it still doesn't understand, without undoing the hard-won transparency and trust established in Book 1. This sets up a new mystery engine, a question, not just a threat, escalating stakes, and a compelling direction for the next tilde 40,000 word arc. # sequel, The Threshold Question, Chapter 1, The New Inscription, tilde 1,800 2,000 words. The inscription appeared on the desk in Greyhaven's library 3 days after the first anniversary of the gate's reckoning. It was not written in ink, nor carved with a tool. It simply arrived asterisk, a thin line of luminous script etched into the wood as if the archive itself had leaned through the ash arch and left a fingerprint. The first seal is renewed. The next threshold is not a gate, it is a question. I stood over it for a long time, the small anchor key beside it catching the morning light. The key had become familiar in its steadiness, cool to the touch, engraved with the bell, the gate, the eye, an emblem that no longer felt like a warning, but like a responsibility I had learned to carry without flinching. Mara Keene joined me, carrying a stack of new archive materials, letters, photographs, a brittle parish record, and a child's drawing of the church tower that had been tucked into an old hymn book. She set them down carefully, as if the room itself were fragile. "People keep bringing things," she said, "as if the archive is hungry for stories." "It's not hungry," I replied, though I wasn't entirely sure. "It's listening." The ash arch shimmered at the far end of the library, the gate hovering between worlds. Through it, the twilight plain looked much as it always had. Misted ruins, drifting lights, the distant bell tower standing like a patient sentinel. Yet there was a subtle change, less a shift in the landscape than a change in attention. The watching figures in the ruins seemed more purposeful now, their movements coordinated, as if they were part of a larger system responding to Hollowgate's coherence. Mara traced the new inscription with her fingertip, careful not to touch the anchor key. "A question," she said. "Not a door, not a lock, a question." "A question we haven't asked yet," I said, "or one we haven't been able to hear." The library door opened, and Alaric Venn stepped in, his satchel over one shoulder, his expression alert. He had become a steady presence in Hollowgate, part historian, part mediator, part quiet conscience. Behind him came Silas Venn, no longer the shadow he had once been, but a man who moved through the town with measured humility. He carried a small bundle of papers, his own notes, now offered openly, corrections and all. Alaric's eyes went immediately to the inscription. "This is new," he said, "and it's not random. The archive doesn't improvise symbols." Silas's voice was low, controlled. "Then it's responding to something happening above ground." Mother Sella arrived a moment later, her brass bell in hand, her face calm but concerned. "The town is unsettled," she said. "Not in fear, at least not the old fear, in uncertainty. People are asking what comes next. They're asking whether the gate is finished teaching us." I looked out the window toward the valley. Hollowgate had changed in the year since the reckoning. Gardens were better tended, children laughed in the streets, old grudges had softened into awkward reconciliations. The public archive had become a living institution, and the council, chosen for integrity rather than power, had kept the town from slipping back into secrecy. Yet beneath the surface I sensed a restlessness. The valley had learned how to face its past. Now it needed a future it could choose. A knock came at the door, and the council's newest member, Jory Harkness, a practical, skeptical carpenter who had once distrusted mystery talk, entered with a folded letter in hand. "This came to the archive this morning," he said. "No return address, just a single line." He handed it to me. The paper was plain, the handwriting unfamiliar, precise, almost mechanical. "You answered the old bell, now answer the new one." A chill ran through the room. The bell above the church had not rung since we had redefined its purpose. It sounded only as a measured warning, a reminder, a call to awareness. If someone was invoking it now, it meant something had changed. Alaric's jaw tightened. "This isn't Vale," he said. "Vale is still under supervision. He's helping in the archive, not plotting." Silas's gaze moved to the ash arch. "Then someone else has noticed the shift," he said. "Someone who knows enough to be dangerous." Mara's voice was steady but urgent. "We need to treat this as a town matter," she said. "Not a private hunt. If there's a new bell, literal or metaphorical, we bring the council in. We bring witnesses. We keep the gate transparent." I nodded, agreed, but we also need to understand what the archive is asking. The next threshold is not a gate, it is a question. What question? Alaric stepped closer to the ash arch, studying the shimmering surface. "The archive responds to coherence," he said, "to the town's ability to hold its story together. If it's offering a question, it's offering a test, one that will help us become stronger or reveal what we still refuse to face." Mother Sella's voice was gentle but firm. "Then we ask it," she said, "not with fear, with humility." I approached the arch. The air near it was cool, carrying the scent of wet stone and distant rain. As I neared, the inscription's light intensified and the gate's surface rippled, revealing the twilight plain beyond with unusual clarity. In the distance, the bell tower's carvings glowed in a new sequence, symbols I recognized from the first seal, but arranged differently, as if forming a sentence rather than a mechanism. The archive's voice returned, calm, patient, intimate. "Elena Ward," it said, "you have healed the old wound. Now you must choose what kind of memory you will carry forward. The question is this: what do you owe the lives that were taken to keep Hollowgate safe?" The words landed like a stone thrown into deep water. The question was not a riddle designed to trap me. It was a moral demand. It asked for reckoning, not revenge. It asked for restitution, not guilt. It asked whether Hollowgate could transform its grief into responsibility. Mara's breath caught. "That's the threshold," she whispered. "Not crossing a gate, crossing ourselves." Silas's voice shook slightly. "Then whoever sent the letter knows we're being tested," he said, "and they want us to fail." A sound echoed from the passage behind the library, footsteps, deliberate, moving with confidence. The door opened again and a stranger stepped through, a tall man in travel clothes, carrying a small case, his face calm, his eyes sharp. He looked at the ash arch, then at the anchor key, then at me. "My name is Dr. Sato Ren ***, he said. "I'm an archivist from the Institute for Boundary Studies. I've been tracking the Hollowgate Gate for years, and I believe someone is trying to force it open, using your town's unfinished grief as leverage." Alaric's expression tightened. "Force it open how?" Dr. Sato set his case down and opened it, revealing a small device that emitted a faint, rhythmic pulse, like a distant bell. "With a resonance," he said. A sound designed to destabilize the balance you've built. A sound that will make the gate hungry again. The church bell above us, silent for months, began to ring, soft at first, then louder, as if it had been waiting for this moment. And somewhere in the dark beyond the gate, something answered.